Welcome back to Star Wars Shovelware, my name's Luke, and today on the channel we're going to be taking a look at Touken Ranbu Warriors, the latest Warriors title from Koei Tecmo Games, and a collaboration with a popular Japanese IP, Touken Ranbu, which sees 15 blades battling against a time-travelling army of insectoids who are attempting to change the course of Sengoku history. Now, I've always been a fan of the Warriors series, but does this crossover work, and is it worth your time and cash? Well, hit that like button, subscribe for future Switch reviews and content, and let's find out. So if you've played any of the Dynasty Warrior games, you'll know that the storylines of these games are loosely based around events and characters from historical Chinese text, and in this regard Touken Ranbu Warriors follows suit, though it does swap out the Chinese dynasties for Japanese ones, specifically Japan's Sengoku Era. As per usual though, the narrative takes liberties when it comes to the factual accuracy of its characters and events, even more so than previous games, and this is mainly due to the influence that Touken Ranbu has on it. Now, if like me you've never heard of Touken Ranbu, it initially started life as a Japanese free-to-play collectible card game in which the game's characters are the personification of legendary swords who travel into the past to defeat evil forces. Touken Ranbu Warriors sees 15 of these characters coming together to battle against the History Retrograde Army, an insect-based life form who are attempting to disrupt and alter history by travelling back to the Sengoku Era and influencing events there. Now, there's really too much lore in the game to go into any real detail, but essentially the Touken Danshi, as our sword warriors are called, operate from a base outside of time, and the game sees you travelling back and forth through the Sengoku Era, writing the timeline and restoring history. The story is mainly delivered in the form of cutscenes with Japanese voiceovers though, which does mean plenty of reading for those interested in the narrative. But rather than just the usual strategy-heavy historical narrative, Touken Ranbu Warriors kind of has two stories running alongside each other, one being the Japan era stuff, and the other being the Touken Ranbu stuff to do with the insectoids and all that business. And if you're a fan of Touken Ranbu or have enjoyed previous Dynasty Warrior narratives, then you'll probably enjoy this one. I would however say that, like previous games, there are a lot of different character names bandied about the place, and the story can be a little complex and hard to follow at times, especially with it jumping back and forth through history. Overall though, it's not bad stuff. I enjoyed seeing the relationships of the different characters evolve and the way in which the historical narrative changed each time you completed a mission, and my only real criticism would be how the story progresses, but that's mainly due to its impact on gameplay, and we'll get onto why this is shortly. So as with the story, if you've played any of the Warriors games, you should be familiar with the general premise of the gameplay in this one, but for those who haven't, the series is basically summarised as a 1 vs 1000 scenario where the player controls an absolute beast of a character and gets to annihilate thousands of underpowered minions. As with previous titles, the game also offers a variety of characters with which to dish out these death blows, each with their own personalities, attributes and movesets. Now, we'll actually start by talking about the character roster, as this one does things a little bit different when it comes to selecting who you want to play as, but there are a total of 15 Touken Danshi, and these are split down into 5 different units. Now, why these units matter is because the game's campaign mode is broken down into chapters, each of which are assigned to a particular unit, and the game's first chapter sees the 5th unit containing these two dudes embarking on missions. But the thing is that throughout the whole chapter, you're only actually able to play as these two characters, bar the odd occasion when you get an assisting character who joins you. The same goes for the other chapters, which are assigned to other units, and so you essentially spend 3 hours playing as the same characters, which you'll usually take into battle as a duo, and I really disliked this format as I just wanted to experiment and find a character that I enjoyed playing. You're able to actually replay missions to earn more XP and materials, and when doing so you can play as any character, but to be honest, replaying missions is pretty pointless as you earn more than enough of these things from the story alone. So now that you understand how the chapters work, let's talk about the sorties themselves, and within each chapter you'll embark on the rather dramatically titled Onslaught investigations, which are essentially disturbances in time caused by the HRA invasions. Now the objectives in each investigation varies from one sortie to the next and include the usual defeat X number of enemies, eliminate enemy generals or escort friendly generals to safety, but there are a couple of more unique ones like the stealth missions where you have to avoid being spotted by enemies, or ones where you need to explore and locate hidden enemies. As you might expect though, it's not super deep or complicated stuff by any means, and I'd go so far as saying Touken Ranbu is probably the easiest Warriors title that I've ever played. Most of the maps in Touken Ranbu are a fraction of the size of the Dynasty Warrior maps, and each sortie takes at most 10 minutes to complete, which makes them ideal for playing in short stints. But this means that you really lose that epic battlefield vibe and sense of scale which comes from traversing the map on horseback, and the game ends up feeling more like a 1 vs a couple of hundred rather than a 1 vs 1,000. Now when it comes to the game's combat, it's been a while since I've played a Dynasty Warriors game, but the fighting in Touken Ranbu follows much the same format. You execute a chain of basic attacks with the Y button, can dodge enemy attacks by tapping the B button alongside a direction, and you have 4 different special attacks which can be activated either by hitting X after a certain number of basic attacks, or by holding down the R button and then pressing either X, Y, B or A. There's also an easy control scheme which only requires you to press the Y button and automatically dodges and performs special attacks for you, and this is great for accessibility but makes combat pretty boring. Now in addition to your basic and special attacks, you also have a bunch of Musu style attacks which require you to build meters before you can execute them. The first of these being your duo attacks executed by hitting ZR. The second are Hitatsu attacks, which are this game's version of Musu attacks and feature a flashy cutscene. And finally you have Sotu mode, which can be activated by pressing ZL when its bar is full, and this will see both you and your partner attacking together for a short duration, which ends with a double team Hitatsu attack. Now if you enjoyed the combat in other Warriors games, then you'll likely enjoy this one. It's very much the same thing, smash up loads of little enemies, tackle some bigger commanders and fight the odd boss every once in a while. However, the enemies themselves are comprised of legions of green and purple flying insect creatures, a few larger insectoids and spider-looking ones, and then occasionally some Japanese foot soldiers or generals. And unlike the charismatic generals of Dynasty Warriors, such as the legendary Lubu or Xiaihu Dun, the enemies in Touken Ranbu just feel a little bit generic. Now the final boss fights of the zones are a little more interesting, but they're still just big bugs at the end of the day and void of any real personality. Difficulty wise, the game is also not on par with Dynasty Warriors. On normal mode it's still incredibly easy, and easy mode just removes any challenge whatsoever, so if you're a veteran Warriors player, I'd recommend sticking it straight onto hard mode. Now as you play through missions, your characters will gain XP and level up, increasing the stats, and you'll also obtain materials, and the final thing to talk about is the Honmaru, or base of operations of the Touken Danshi. This is where you embark on missions from and can replay previous missions from, but it also serves several other important functions. Firstly, as your Honmaru gains levels through completion of missions, slots in its various rooms will open up, and into these you can dispatch your characters, allowing them to earn passive XP and improve the bond level, a minor mechanic which reveals new dialogue options and opens up additional passive skills. The cash you earn can be spent in the Honmaru shop to purchase equipable items which boost characters' stats, or alternatively you can purchase extra materials, and these are used to upgrade your characters, unlocking new attacks and special abilities for them and boosting the stats. Finally, when returning to the Honmaru, you'll occasionally have a minigame option appear in certain rooms, and these feature a variety of short games which offer materials, XP and cash depending on how well you do in them, and I thought these were a nice little addition. Now when it comes to my overall opinion on Touken Ranbu Warriors, I'd say that in comparison to the other Warriors games I've played, this one kind of feels like an entry level game. It has some interesting mechanics and the characters and special moves all look pretty cool, but there's just no real challenge to it, and I much preferred the more larger scale battlegrounds of the Dynasty Warrior games to the small 10-minute burst-like battles of Touken Ranbu. As I said, I didn't like it that you couldn't just take any of the characters through the story, but even if you could, many of the characters feel pretty samey, and obviously it's all melee based attacks with swords, so there are no ranged options or big slow mace wielding bastards for you to enjoy. Admittedly, the special moves do have a decent amount of variety to them, but when it comes to the leveling and stat increases, all of the characters are pretty much identical. All in all though, it's not a bad Warriors game, it's just not quite up there in my opinion. If you're a fan of Touken Ranbu, you'll no doubt be overjoyed to see some of your favourite characters in the first 3D game, but if you're a Warriors fan, expect more than an easy ride with this one, and if nothing else, just enjoy it for its story. So visually, I personally thought the game had some pretty decent graphics for a Switch game. Admittedly, they're not as flashy or as impressive as something like Age of Calamity, and the mob density is much smaller, but I like the character designs and the animations of the special moves, and the environments had a decent amount of detail to them. When it comes to the audio, the game sounds pretty much like your usual Warriors game. We get some nice slashy sounds and punchy hits for the specials, and have some great over the top voice acting for the Hitatsu attacks. Finally, the game's soundtrack is also pretty solid. We get some nice upbeat action music infused with that usual anime flair, which is perfectly fine to slash along to. So on the performance side of things, I was actually quite impressed with how well the game handled on the Switch. I had the odd frame rate dip here and there, but overall performance was quite solid. When it comes to issues, nothing really major in terms of gameplay. Like I said, the challenge just wasn't there, and you're able to basically stun lock enemies by chaining your specials and then dodge cancelling out of them, but I didn't experience any bugs or glitches whilst playing, and my main issue with the game was being limited to playing specific characters. Other than this, I'd say that some levels are just overly short. I managed to complete several of them in under 2 minutes, and it just made me question even more why they decided to reduce the playfield size by so much. When all's said and done though, Touken Ranbu Warriors is a reasonable addition to the series. In my opinion, I'd say it's slightly below average in terms of its gameplay, but its storyline was enjoyable enough, and when it comes to my own personal rating, I'm going to be giving Touken Ranbu Warriors 3 out of 5 stars. Touken Ranbu Warriors is likely going to appeal more to fans of Touken Ranbu, but if you're new to the Warriors games or have younger children and want to introduce them to it, then I'd say that this is easily one of the most accessible games in the series. And so that about does it for this review of Touken Ranbu Warriors on the Nintendo Switch. As always, if it helped you out, be sure to hit that like button to show your appreciation. Let me know if you're a fan of the Warriors games and what your favourite one is in the comments section below, and if you watch my content regularly but are not yet subscribed, then please consider doing so. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.